Good morning. I'm the Reverend Molly Housh Gordon, the minister of this congregation. I'm so glad to see you today. My pronouns are she and her, and I am wearing a burgundy dress with a white stole with rainbow stripes along the edge. I'm a pale-skinned woman with red hair that is very long on one side and very short on the other. And I wanted to share with you briefly this morning an update on Unitarian Universalist polity. Aren't you fascinated? And this is about some stuff that's upcoming at the next UU General Assembly in Pittsburgh in June. So Unitarian Universalist congregations are self-governing and self-determining entities who join together in community to create the Unitarian Universalist Association, or UUA, which is our national body of congregations. The UUA meets every year for a General Assembly to engage the business of the association, and this year, a historic proposal is up for vote. Article 2 of the bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association contains our collective statement of principles and purposes, including what some of you know as the 7 principles that unite and guide us. An 8th principle addressing anti-racism has been proposed and approved by individual congregations, including our own. And the 8 principles are all listed on the back of your order of service every Sunday. But periodically, our UUA is charged with revisiting various sections of its bylaws, as most nonprofit organizations are. And over the last several years, an appointed commission has been reviewing Article 2, which contains the principles and purposes. Now, Article 2 has undergone major revisions several times in the history of the UUA, and our current statement of the 7+8 principles was adopted in 1985. Since then, our principles have become a touchstone for many Unitarian Universalists. This year, the Article 2 Commission has proposed another major revision to the UUA's bylaws, which would replace the 1985 Statement of Principles with a new statement of shared values. It is a theologically rich statement that places love at the center of our life together and then lifts up our connected values of justice, equity, generosity, transformation, interdependence, and pluralism. It contains a strong statement regarding the spiritual importance of anti-racism and anti-oppression work, and the author of the proposed 8th principle, which our congregation adopted in May, was a member of the commission that drafted this statement for a new Article 2. This bylaws revision would not remove the 7 or 8 principles from our congregational life or culture, but it would remove them from the UUA bylaws, replacing them with this new statement of shared values. Delegates from all Unitarian Universalist congregations will be voting on this revision at the General Assembly in June, including our own delegates from here at UUCC. So, if you would like to learn more, to delve into conversation about this statement and about the evolution of our UUA bylaws over the years, I'd like to invite you to join me at one of 2 identical information and discussion sessions in May. Look out in your email for information, or you could mark your calendars now for sessions on Thursday evening, May 11th on Zoom, or Tuesday evening, May 16th in person. I look forward to exploring this work of the greater Unitarian Universalist whole in our country with you and imagining how we might express our shared theology with one another. So thank you for taking a moment to talk polity with me this morning, and we'll now delve into our worship service. Rise up in every way that feels right in my own soul. Rise up in every way that feels right in my own soul. I rise up in every way that feels right in my my own soul, I rise up, in every way feels right, my own soul rise up, every way feels right in my own soul, I rise up in every way that feels right in my own soul. Last time I rise up, every way feels right, my own soul. And with those who have already spoken their fear and sorrow and anger, we join our hearts once more in lament and justice-seeking anger in response to the Missouri Attorney General's actions on Thursday, severely restricting gender-affirming care for trans Missourians of every age. We hold our trans siblings in deepest care as their well-being is attacked once more. We join our hearts and hands with all who are already resisting these rulings, and we recommit ourselves to being a space that affirms, celebrates, and defends trans lives. And we conclude in prayer with the words of George Kimmich Beach, "Giver of being and freedom, thou who touches our lives in unforeseen ways, who unsettles our ease and upsets our self-satisfactions, we wait in these moments of silence to let the hidden processes of healing and growth do their silent work within us, and to let the quiet work of reconciliation be renewed among us. Because we know that the ultimate issues of life, healing and growth, reconciliation and renewal cannot be forced by excess of activity or by tumult of words, we seek out this stillness. We seek the quiet, the resting place of our restless hearts. Because we live with mystery, we trust that which is deeper than we know, which touches our hearts, which steadies us and rekindles our spirits, which finally, in faith, may be named the love that has laid hold upon us and will not let us go. Amen. And will you join me in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life? I invite you to rise or remain seated as you are most comfortable as we sing.
Vine and branch. We're connected in this world of sound and echo, figure and shadow, the leaves contingent, roots pushing against earth. An apple belongs to itself, to stem and to tree, to air that claims it, then ground. Connections balance. Each motion changes another. Precarious, hanging together, we don't know what our lives support. And we touch in the least shift of breathing. Each holy thing is borrowed. Everything depends.
This week, the city utility folks dug a big hole at the bottom of my yard. And given that it was not in our modest garden, and given that we have 2 young children in our home, this hole was a source of great rejoicing. They covered the hole over with steel for safety, and they left a huge pile of dirt nearby. Oh, what joy it is to have a huge pile of dirt nearby. My 5-year-old particularly runs straight to the pile every morning before school and every evening after. Screens, who needs them? We have a big pile of dirt. And on Tuesday, at the before-school dirt pile visit, I found myself pulling up a lawn chair and sitting to watch her joy from the base of the pile. She stood on top and turned her face to the sun, and then we entered this cycle of play where she would scramble up the hill with dirt sliding down around her, throw her arms up in celebration at the top, and then she'd slide back down, straight into my arms, where she'd bury her head in my chest and say, "I like you, Mommy." Then she'd turn right around, scramble up again, slide down again, like me again. And on we went. It was one of those moments that snap you fully present and you can hardly think anything but thank you. And it's a moment you could live in forever, the only kind of eternity you can touch. And I have a strange and very human mental quirk in moments like these, which is that I immediately find myself solemnly remembering this moment will end. That this joy cannot last and would not be quite so precious if it could. It's not so much grief as poignancy, and I do welcome it. For one thing, this impermanence is simply the truth. And for another, I think it lends a sense of depth and shade to the joy, to have it tinged with foresight of loss. This time at the dirt pile, I found myself fast-forwarding 10 years to when my 5-year-old will be 15 and thinking, I wonder if she'll ever say she likes me then. And then I snapped back to the sunlight and the sliding dirt and the still tiny face pressing into my breast, and I felt overturned by this sorrow-tinged joy, which I think might be the only true kind. Nearby my new dirt pile is my old free pantry, which has lasted for 3 years now through cycles of abundance and bare shelves. And recently, for the first time, someone tagged this old little free pantry with a little bit of graffiti, which I love because now it reads in stylish Sharpie handwriting, "Nothing lasts forever." Which is to say, each holy thing is borrowed. Which is to say, everything depends. Oh, this knowledge of impermanence, this sense of the precariousness of life, how it teeters at the edge like a baby bird about to fly out of the nest. How life tips and slides, and sometimes that slide takes us into loving arms, and sometimes into disaster. It is so hard to stay open to that feeling, teetering at the edge of love and disaster. Whole systems are built to protect those who can afford their participation fees from that sense of precariousness. Whole societies are built, supposedly, to offer us some sense of security in the terrible face of the fact that everything depends. That we all depend on each other when we'd rather not, and on forces we will never see or understand. The folks in our community who live on the street, who visit the pantry in the yard, to check whether it might have what they need to help them survive that day or that week. They mostly do not have the luxury of ignoring this fact, this vulnerability to life's terrors and its beauty. We have created a culture where any sense of security costs dearly, both in resources and in freedoms. power hoarders, systems of oppression, and empire have a millennia-tested strategy to utilize the truth of precariousness in our lives. The strategy is to ensure that any sense of security the majority of people cobble together through deep community is taken away by individualism, policy violence, or outright violence, and is then sold back to the people at the cost of their own power. Consenting to this exchange has created a culture that preserves a sense of safety for only a few, and that demands in exchange our innate human freedom to connect, to enjoy, and to move freely through this life balanced between loving arms and disaster. These systems of oppression and power have long been in place. And during periods of relative earthly and economic stability, those with privilege can mostly ignore the systems themselves and ignore the precariousness those systems hide, while those closest to the edge are always forced to teeter at the brink. But now, we are in the midst of one of the most precarious periods we've faced as humans on earth. And now no one can ignore it. The climate has changed. The economic system that rushed that change has created the most lopsided, unbalanced distribution of resources we've seen in a long time. Systems are crumbling and sliding down around us as the future of human life on earth is thrown into question. We are wondering whether we will survive. We are witnessing the many species who have not survived. We do not know whether we will slide down this hill toward loving arms or disaster. It is a whole new level of global precariousness. It is one that shoves itself to the forefront of all of our lives now, no matter our privileges. The world remains so beautiful, and more of us than ever are also confronted with its terror. How we will respond to this precariousness is the question of our age, but it was always the question of human life. It's simply one we are now forced to confront. And the answer has profound material implications. Because in the face of such mass uncertainty and insecurity, fascism is offering a compelling option, and many are taking it. All over the country, all over the world, many are taking it, are standing in line to claim their portion of its false promise of security in the face of the most precarious time we've ever encountered. And when I really let myself feel how close to the edge we are all teetering, when I peer into that void, I can almost understand why. But in the end, that promise of security is one the powers of empire cannot fulfill. And of course, it comes at the cost of our own power and our freedom. It comes at the cost of the human kin that are sacrificed by empire, and therefore the cost of our very souls. We see this terrible trade happening all around us, right here, right now. The illusion of security in exchange for book bans, in exchange for attacks on queer and trans folks, in exchange for fever-pitch white supremacy, all of which are raging around us here in Missouri in this moment. Those are some of the costs of consent to fascist control in exchange for an illusion of safety. And there are many who have consented to that option, to that promise of security at the cost of freedom. But there are many too, I think there are more, who know in their bones that that cost is too high, who do not consent, who refuse to be sacrificed, who are fighting for their own lives and the lives of their loved ones, and who are contesting for our collective liberation and our mutual thriving. And for those folks who are staying to fight, I want to suggest that the battle we are fighting here is not primarily against hate, but against anxiety, against deep, soul-destroying fear and its attendant need for control at any cost. Fearful control that is absolutely directed toward particular groups of people and ideas, but that is still, in fact, a profound and soul-deep anxiety. This anxiety denies the truth at the heart of life itself, that each holy thing is borrowed, that everything depends. What we are seeing in the flailing, oppressive systems around us is a culture collectively unable to stay present to the poignant paradox of loss, which is entwined, of life, which is entwined with loss. What we are seeing is a culture that cannot bear how love and loss are entangled. And this is not only a political problem, or even, I think, an ethical or philosophical one. It is a spiritual question that faces us now. Do we have the tools to gaze into the face of life's impermanence and to respond by opening ourselves further, rather than closing ourselves off? Do we have steady practices of presence to pain and love which always dance together? Can we feel the true joy that is always tinged with foresight of sorrow? And can we welcome both into our hearts? Are we committed to a deep practice of community where everything depends because each one is depending on each other? Can we be the loving arms at the bottom of the slide down? These are the questions that lead us back to our humanity. These are the spiritual practices that can lead us all collectively away from the brink of fascist control and help us slide, if we must slide, toward loving arms, toward each other instead of disaster. For that is the only response to precariousness that makes sense in the end, turning toward each other. American educator John Bradshaw once said, "We are all hurtling through space on a rock and we're all going to die. You would think we would be holding hands and singing." Too often, in the face of insecurities of all kinds, we build walls between us rather than joining our hands to sing. The truth is, though, that in the face of life's terrors, its fragility, its impermanence, the only thing that provides a sense of true safety is each other. Physician and trauma expert Gabor Mate has written, "Safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection." Fascism promises safety by destroying connection, when in reality, openness to others is our only way to true and sustained safety, safety which comes not from defense and isolation, but from connection. Real, vulnerable, deep connection with one another is the best security there is, because then we can hold each other. And that security is available to us now, even in these deeply precarious times. If we will unclench our hands and step right up to the edge and risk trust in the face of all that is fragile and impermanent, risk love in the knowledge of loss. This kind of vulnerable connection is balm for our hearts, and it is the answer to our anxious culture, and it is the path away from the false promises of empire. It is all of those things, just to open our hearts in vulnerable connection. Indeed, it may be our deepest political, ethical, and spiritual call in this moment, simply to turn back toward each other in openness. In this precious and precarious moment, we are invited to allow ourselves to be, in the words of the poet Ross Gay, who will be speaking at Unbound Book Festival on Friday, to allow ourselves to be undone by one another. Undone as in unfinished and incomplete, allowing ourselves to sink into the truth of our individual, collective, and perpetual emergence. Undone as in nakedly vulnerable, in such entangled relationship to one another that we interdepend openly and wholly. And undone as in full of sorrow-tinged joy, which is the only true kind, which is the joy we find when we live open-hearted and open-handed before the truth that each holy thing is borrowed, belongs not to us, slips through our fingers like water, like sand, and we are undone. And in that undoing is our only salvation. So I invite you, in the face of these precarious times, to think of how you are undone. Think of where you are undone. Go there, to the foot of the dirt pile, to the little free pantry, to the red bud already going from blossom to leaf, to the ruins where life is springing up wild and free, to the edge where your open heart finds another. Go where you are undone and don't look away. Stay with it. There lies our only freedom. There lies our only safety. Undone, open and beautiful, where each holy thing is borrowed and everything depends.